Welcome, folks. We're here with Connor Torres from Dotware Games. Great company working on some cool games. Connor, you got a lot of experience in Unreal Engine, both as a developer and an educator. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick for the audience?
Absolutely. I'm Connor, and I'm the CEO and director of Dotware Games. We're working on a game called Monster Bounties right now, unannounced. And you capture cryptids like Bigfoot, Skinwalker, and Mothman. And I've been doing a whole lot of research and development into metahumans lately, and specifically getting character eyes to look at dynamic targets as
Oh,
well as
interesting.
procedural character animation so that they reach for things that are there in the world rather than keyframing that ahead of time. So there's some interesting stuff happening in R&D. But yeah, what do you got for me, Elburz?
You mean it's not like the days of Morrowind when you go to open a door and your hand just kind of goes right into the door? You're like, oh, I'm
Oh,
opening the door.
I
The good
I
old
I
days.
know.
The
The
good old
good old
days.
days.
The
You
good
know how
old
I
days.
feel about Morrowind, man. Best
100%.
game ever. Best game ever. You know, it's before we got things too overcomplicated with the potential of what you can do. And I actually have a feeling that some of this applies to what we're going to talk about today, which is sometimes something like Unreal Engine gives you so many possibilities, so much potential for what you can create and what you can do that us as developers often forget about the intended outcomes of whatever it is you're making, game or something else. So, in a game like Morrowind, yeah, you don't have very good animation stuff, but they cut to the chase because it's about what's in the player's mind. And I think in terms of software design in general, but most definitely games, when a player starts interacting with your application, very quickly they stop seeing your application and they begin to see the model of the experience that is in their mind. So your development, to all people who are developing things, uh, you should be working with the intended outcome in mind. There's too much, especially nowadays, overproduction, over animation, over complication of systems that look really good. They feel really good to us developers. But how many of us have been playing like a great game, Red Dead Redemption 2 or something, and you go to pick up a can, and instead you're watching, a 30-second animation of him doing this thing, and it's like it was cool the first time, but like the 100th time, it really is kind of a drag. So I would say, and I know what our topic is for today is about, advice and tips and getting development. If I were to lead with one, it would be develop with your intended outcomes in mind and don't get too allured by the shiny things that the engine offers that you can do. As they say in Jurassic Park, just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should.
That's a great tip, I think, especially because myself coming from my background, a touch designer, you could almost think that there's kind of six systems, maybe 4 to 6 systems, depending how deep you get. One of them is for number data, one of them is for 2D textures, one of them is for 3D, like et cetera, like this. And for a lot of folks that enter touch designer, they think, oh, that's a lot of systems. But I had that same kind of like a little bit of overwhelming feel when I jumped into Unreal, and I was like, oh, okay, I got blueprints, material editor, I got Niagara module script, I got Niagara itself, and there's like a lot of stuff going on. So I think that's a really great one for folks to think about, and it's even one that I tell a lot of folks coming into touch designer, and I wonder if you have a similar experience or thought about this, which is that I always tell people, and this is the case for Houdini as well in VFX, which is that there's people whose whole lives are only knowing 1/4 or 1/5 of Houdini. And they are extremely successful and happy, and they like to have a great job, and they do VFX for a living. And I think even as similarly in touch designer, when folks are just learning, you don't have to learn every single system available. You know, exactly like you're saying, what's your intended outcome? What do you want to build? Let's just scope down and get the tools we need for that. Have you found that similar in Unreal, or is it more of an application where just by nature of development that you have to kind of even from the get go start getting into systems? And do you have any advice for folks that might be feeling a little bit of overwhelm?
Absolutely. So first off, I'm convinced there's no one single person on the planet who is proficient in every system inside of the Unreal Engine, and I mean that across all of developers, the developers at Epic, people do specialize. Now, you could specialize in so many, several, many systems, but you can't master everything. And there's so many systems that are just like they're like in beta, or you have to enable them, into Unreal, but they're still part of that Unreal ecosystem. This is a multi-decades long product of some of the smartest people in the world developing it, since Unreal 1 in the 90s. So this is something that is much bigger than any single one developer. So yeah, you want to, in some ways, find a really good competency and general understanding of the basic Unreal Editor interface and stuff. There's some things that will pay off more than others. So again, you learn like general blueprint scripting usage. Well, like we talked about in other videos, that's player controller, that's to do with main menus, that's to do with characters, features, scripting. Once you got that down, you really do open what you can do in Unreal Engine. But that visual scripting system is very different from, say, the material visual scripting system, which is how you make the appearance of things, surface properties. You want to make emissive lights, perhaps, or the texture of something to look just real and look bumpy and reflect the light just right, or create some portal vortex or something. Well, that might be those are all examples of things you could do in materials with various layers of complexity. So you do need to know what you're getting into Unreal 4, what your intended outcomes are, and to explore the various avenues and areas of the engine. But no, nobody knows everything in the engine. And very often I will find people do, I was just visiting an old class that I used to teach and seeing how the students were progressing. And there was first year students in there who were doing something in Unreal Engine that was incredibly like complex and cool, where that you press a button and the character masks out part of the environment. You kind of like X-ray vision and see through it. And I said, well, how'd you do this? And I was expecting some crazy giant shader graph, or maybe they followed some tutorial series, but no, they just went into the engine. They found that there's some material called widget pass-through material. And I guess through experimentation, realized they put that on just a mesh in the world, that it just did this vortex thing. And so it was like, they didn't even need to develop the system for it. So that's again, awesome. That I respect, because it's just about the intended outcome at the end of the day. It doesn't matter how you get there.
That's a great kind of concept to lead with. Are there things that you found, and I there's a lot of directions that can go, because I always say, when somebody asks you like, well, what's your advice, or what's the best tips? It's like, well, about what? Like, what do you want tips for? So I would like to, because that's a great conceptual one. Coming down into the beginner side of things, is there something that you see a lot of beginners struggle with? A lot of folks who all kind of run into the same, telephone pole in some sense. Is there one of those in Unreal?
Sure. Unreal Engine gotchas. I
could frame it a different way as well, and you could see which one feels good. Is that, because I think there's one aspect of like, a lot of people get value of like, oh, what's the thing that most people get stuck on? Another side of it is, as a pro, what feature, when you see somebody use it, or you see somebody use like a specific technique or a tool, you're like, oh, this person has, whether they had some good training or they just spent the time to kind of like learn their skills, it kind of gives them a little bit of elevation over somebody else who maybe isn't using that tool or technique. Or
well, first off, I'd like to just say what my most practical, pragmatic advice would be to people who are just starting out in Unreal Engine, or have been in it for maybe a couple months or something like this, or coming from a different software, let's say, which is use the engine to teach yourself. Use the engine to teach yourself. You want to use other resources too, of course. YouTube tutorials, Unreal Engine live streams by Epic. Those who don't really follow along, you just watch and they're talking about, put those on when you go for a run, or it's in your car, or, as you fall asleep at night, this kind of, book smarts kind of stuff. The Unreal Engine documentation, absolutely. Go to the documentation, read the documentation. Just Google that Unreal documentation. You should be reading those articles. But the engine itself is full of tooltips. So if you look at my screen here, I'm interfacing with the Unreal Editor, and if I were to hover over just like this button here, you can see I get a little bit of a tooltip, but it says hold Control-Alt for more. And if I do that, I will get a much more specific...
Wow. Look at that.
Right.
I've never seen that before.
and not only that, it also comes with a link to the documentation.
Oh, that's beautiful. Look at that.
So this goes back to what I'm saying is use the editor to teach yourself. And this will help you in more than one way. First off, you're already in the engine. So it eliminates that sort of software fatigue of I gotta leave, I gotta come back, I gotta leave, come back. And this sort of situation applies across, blueprint nodes. Here I'm holding this blueprint node, Control Alt. So use the engine to teach yourself would be my first big piece of advice. In terms of gotchas, which is you get into Unreal Engine and you're starting to kind of like feel good about it, Dunning-Kruger effect, and what's going to like trip you up, later. I would say probably one of those things would be, and this might apply more to the interactive application style thing. So if you're just doing visual design, maybe take this with a grain of salt, but over reliance on marketplace meshes and various bridge meshes to start your area or level design. It is far better to block out with primitives that are really fast. So I bring out this cube and okay, there's my wall, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm moving super fast, so I'm going to go ahead and take that camera down. Alt drag. So what I might do is block out a level in this manner so that I can figure out where things are going to go. But maybe this is going to be a tree or something. So I'm putting this here. This is going to work better because you'll be able to play your interactive application in the context of the spacing and the size and the scale. And then later on, you'll do an art pass, which will include putting in final meshes and lighting. Problem is if you just start with like all these awesome meshes you bring in from the marketplace, it really feels like level design, but it's really hard to change afterwards. And when you realize it, when you realize, your tree and the 17 shrubs that you use the foliage painting tool and many rocks and stuff does not belong here, it belongs over there. It just becomes very laborious. And then therefore you're unlikely to actually change your level to make it better because you did all this work already, but it maybe it looks cool, but doesn't play well.
If I'm understanding that right, it's like, because at first I thought you actually meant it from the perspective of like, oh, real pros can tell which ones are all of the marketplace assets. And I was like, oh no, do they know? Because for our industry, it's like, wow, we got this thing called Megascans. This is sick. Like, let's use that in everything. But it sounds like
That
it's
doesn't
more.
matter.
It sounds like it's more like I remember back in when I was in the music business, and you were like producing. They would say, oh yeah, don't master now, just like write. Come back, do your mixing and mastering later. And that sounds kind of like in that same mindset of what you're doing with blocking is thinking about this experience, thinking about this environment without, without that process getting slowed down because you're trying to all of a sudden figure out the foliage tool, or you're downloading all these big assets. Every time you download one, it takes 5 minutes to like throw it in there. You're just like, oh no, I want the process of the creation of this environment, scale, movement around it, like all these things to be first and foremost, and then afterwards I can come in and kind of pretty it up with
Absolutely.
better things.
You want to kind of get the general outline there. Like if you're drafting a paper or something, your visual design is no different. You're working with those intended outcomes in mind. Just to circle back to what you said about Megascans and marketplace stuff, will other pros recognize that rock or that tree or the fact that it's an Unreal? Yeah, maybe. Probably. Who cares? They're actually not your audience. And that's something that I think as people get really into Unreal development, myself included, but I'm mostly over it, you start to get a little bit shy about using that example map that Epic released or using stuff because it's not your own. It's not. But again, you really have to realize as a developer, it's not about you and your precious process. It's about what the experiences that you're producing, if it be that purely a visual one or a cognitive one, like in a game or something. And you have the right to use these things. And you're actually putting yourself and your product at a disadvantage if you have to do everything from scratch and you can't use these amazing libraries of things. So no, are the days of 3D modeling barrels and rocks and stuff kind of a little bit maybe over because there's so much in the marketplace? Yeah, probably. So don't spend your time doing that, because you could spend your time making something far more valuable, custom, without doing things over again. And I think just final encouragement on that point, no matter what you do, you're using the Unreal Engine. You're using what is the cumulative work of many hundreds of individuals over several decades. like most of the code that your application runs on was not written by you.
Mm-hmm.
And you get that just like Isaac Newton said, if I've seen farther ahead than anybody, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants. And that is our job as creative professionals, is to stand on the shoulders of the giants, those giants being the tools, and to use those to create wonderful, above average, excellent products and environments and interactive applications for other people to enjoy. So our audience, they're not working professionals. There's those people who are going to see, an amazing, beautiful sunset and go, wow, that looks like a sunset that I've seen in the past. They don't care that you use the sky atmosphere tool. It doesn't matter.
Absolutely. And is there any kind of pro thing or pro trick or technique when you see somebody using, especially like you guys are working on your game and there's folks on the team? Is there something that shows you that somebody's like well versed in Unreal Engine? Is there like
Yes.
because I can name a couple on the touch designer side. I feel like from our side, this whole transition towards textures as data, which I know is something that probably Niagara Module Scripts does a lot of as well. But is there something in Unreal where you're like, oh yeah, this person gets it?
Yeah, it's and you don't see it all the time. It's at a higher level, but using components instead of depending very much on class inheritance. So, class inheritance being like, I've got, this fundamental item, and then it gets more specific as time goes on. Maybe in a game, it'd be like, I've got my interactable object, interactable actor blueprint, whatever. And then under that is, the inventory item blueprint. And then a child blueprint of that would be, the sword, but also a child blueprint of it would be, the potion and those other sort of collectible items. And not saying that that's wrong, but in Unreal and in software architecture in general, you have also the ability to compose, aka I don't put the code to live on this marker here. Instead, this marker or this empty espresso shot glass, they can both get the same code, even though they're so fundamentally different, because I have this other kind of invisible thing called a component. I can add a component to the shot glass and add the component here. And in Unreal, that looks like essentially a free-floating event graph. So turning over to the screen here, if I were to make a blueprint class here, I have the choice of actor, which you'll choose 98% of the time, probably, when you're doing your various, things. We already talked about pawn. That's a controllable character. Character is just a child of pawn. Cool. We already talked about player controller. Game mode base. We talked about it. But then you get this actor component guy. And what does it say? An actor component is a reusable component that can be added to any actor. So let's go ahead and just select that and open it. So if I open it, it's going to look just like a blueprint. I get begin play. I get event tick. I can do custom events, all the good stuff. But there's no viewport.
Yeah, unlike the actor ones, there's no viewport or 3D hierarchy or anything like that.
Absolutely. There's no 3D hierarchy. There's no components window. There's no construction script for in-editor stuff. It's just the event graph. And that's essentially what a actor component is. It's a free-floating event graph that I can add to a boulder static mesh in the world, or my complicated machine gun, or my dungeon potion. So when you get really into Unreal development and you realize how stuck you can be by programming everything on a particular blueprint actor and then doing these class hierarchies, you start to see the value in a component-based architecture. Because let's say I'm developing stuff and I don't know what I want to be interactable in my application. Maybe, my character can go up and pick up a sword, sure, but maybe they can go, pick a blade of grass, or maybe go up to a tree stump and, open it and it's like a chest. Well, now we're talking about a lot of different things. In that case, I would make an actor component called interaction component, and I would put all my code responsible for, let's say, making text show up on screen when I look at a particular item that says what that item is. So I would have like a variable here called item name or something. Item name, I would maybe, I would put, the item value, if that matters. Maybe not, because why would it have a value if you're going up to the door, whatever. So I have this component here. So what I'm saying is I could just here the details panel, literally click add, look up, it's called new blueprint, not a very good name, but I just added that particular blueprint and try to make that variable public. I can tell this particular thing in the world, hey, your name is fallen tree. And I could add it to this thing over here and give it completely different data. But now my widgets can talk to that. And again, that's probably the subject of another more deeper, complex video, because there is quite a bit of setup when it comes to this. But if you're working with a pro, I think what they tend to do is they tend to compose their blueprints in addition to using traditional classes.
Yeah, that's a very interesting, because I think that is, it's not similar or dissimilar, but I would imagine, like, I'm just thinking about folks coming from a touch designer background, like they're probably seeing that and thinking a little bit, I guess, in terms of Python extensions, which is a feature we have where you can build a Python class and then attach it to an object. And it could be different kinds of objects, like you're saying. But then it's a great way for reusing code without having to go through and make every single thing complicated. Which I think is going to need a little bit of time in the crock pot in my head still. But I think I think that'll help folks that are also watching draw a couple parallels. So that's interesting. So when you're working on like a project, do you see a lot of components and that kind of like more composing strategy versus, hey, let's make the object-oriented hierarchy like real dense?
Yeah. Well, here's how I've approached it with Dotware. We have a whole concept that I think is brilliant, where we call it the standard library. And we identify anything that is a system or feature something that we may want to reuse in other games of ours. That we don't want to, hey, we're making a new game, guys, day one, starting, but we don't want to redevelop these sort of systems. We develop it in a very agnostic manner. And so like that example I told, that's the real example. We have a SL standard library interactable components. And all I gotta do is drop it on something. It could be a particular blueprint class. It could be something just randomly in the world, like I just showed. And our widgets and everything, they all communicate with that. And you can press, different keys. The reason I started making it was because I wanted something that would universally apply to gamepad controls, which are very limited. You've got less than 10 buttons or whatever versus a keyboard. So I kind of conceptualized, okay, you primary activate, secondary interactivate, tertiary activate, everything needs a back button, this kind of stuff. So we made this very general standard way of interacting with things. And now all we have to do is drop that component on it in any project, as long as that component exists and we have it in our folder that we migrate over, you're good. So it's really good for that kind of repeated functionality. The Python script example makes total sense to me, the way that, it's essentially what it is. This is a event graph that you can add to things. I do think that it's probably not super applicable to the touch designer community unless they're really already like super into blueprints and stuff. It's not totally necessary, but it is somewhere you'd want to go if you are, doing this full time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the tips, my friend. And for
Elburz.
folks out there,
awesome.
We're going to have Connor back for definitely more videos. So if you have questions, put them in the chat, and then those can be topics that we can talk about on our next session.
Sounds fantastic.
Is there anywhere you want to have folks check out your work, your games, anything like that?
Sure. You can go to the Dotware Games YouTube channel and check out my most recent devlog and, Google Dotware Games and see what we're up to. But I'll be back, and I hope we'll be coming back to lots of specific questions in Unreal Engine. And it's just fantastic to see more people getting into this amazing tool. When I found it in 2016 or 17, I was just completely floored with the capability and kind of was like, this has got to be used in other areas. And now I've been seeing it that come to fruition. So really happy to connect again and to help you in the community.
Hey folks, thanks for watching. If you like our YouTube content, I highly recommend you check out the Interactive and Immersive HQ Pro. The HQ Pro is the only comprehensive educational resource and community for immersive design, touch designer, and creative tech pros. In the HQ Pro trainings, we cover almost any topic you can think of, and we go way more in depth than we do in our YouTube tutorials. We have a private group where Matthew Reagan, myself, and our other industry veteran and pioneer teachers answer your questions every single day. If that sounds cool, click the link in the description to learn more. And if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more free Touch Designer and Immersive content.